Hi, thanks so much for having me today. So, my name's MJ Rose, and I'm an author. I've written 12 books, and I'm here to talk about the Book of Lost Fragrances, which is my newest book. I started writing in 1998, was when my first book was published. It was called Lip Service. And I've written quite a number of different kinds of books. Most of them are suspense, some of them are psychological suspense. Lately, they've been more historical suspense. So, the Book of Lost Fragrances has to do with an ancient fragrance that is over 2,000 years old. And when I was doing research, I discovered that Cleopatra had a perfume factory in what is now the Israeli desert. And she was quite obsessed with perfume, and Mark Antony built her a perfume factory. And in ancient Egypt, perfume was both cosmetic, like it is today, and it was also very religious. And priests made perfume then, and Cleopatra had priests who were making perfume for her, and she kept a book of all her fragrance formulas, and that book is real, and it was seen by Cicero and Homer and Pliny the Elder, and they wrote about it, and then it was lost. So there's a book of Cleopatra's fragrances that has been lost for over 2,000 years. And when I read about that, I thought that that was really the beginning of a really interesting setup for a novel. And so my novel is about a modern day brother and sister that own a perfume company, and the family legend is that they have somewhere one of their ancestors found this book of lost fragrances. And the brother decides to look for it, and then he actually goes missing. And the book takes place in the present, in ancient Egypt, in France during the French Revolution. It's a lot of different time plots and stories that all interweave to come together and hopefully make for a really exciting read. So I think I'll answer questions when they show up. And thank you so much for all coming. Also, one other thing at the end of the chat, I'll be picking 10 people to send in a couple of weeks. We'll have the sample of a fragrance that was created for the book. What happened there was when I was writing the book, it was very hard to write so much about smell. And so to center myself, I was burning a lot of candles, scented candles. And my favorite candles were from a company called Joya. And when I finished the book, I sent a manuscript copy of the book to the perfumer who made those candles. And he kind of fell in love with the book and contacted me. And he said he wanted to make a perfume just for the book. And so he's created a perfume called Amsour, which is French for soulmates, and because the book has a lot to do with soulmates. And so he's made Amsour, and it's going to be on sale in Henri Bendel in New York in May. But for now, the only time that anybody can read it, or read it, can't read the scent. The only way anybody can smell it is if I send them a sample. So we're going to be picking people here to send samples to, and you can discover Amsour for yourself. So does anybody have any questions? Oh, okay, let's see. So what inspired me to write the book? Well, I kind of started talking about that already. I've been writing for the last 3 books about reincarnation. And my idea was that after reading a lot about reincarnation, I found out that one of the ways that people access their past lives is through deep meditation or hypnosis. And so I came up with this idea that there were in ancient days meditation tools or memory tools that would actually help people go into their past lives and remember things about who they've been in other times and who they've known. And so I came up with this idea that I would write a series of books that were not, you didn't have to read one after the other, that you could pick them up at different points because they'd all involve different people. But they would all be about the search for these 12 ancient memory tools, and that we would try to find them and sometimes lose them and sometimes not find them. But that would be the kernel of thought for each of the books. So I started with The Reincarnationist, and in that one there were 12 jewels that had Sanskrit writing on them that if you spoke the writing, you could go into this meditative state. And then the next one was The Memorist, and that was about an ancient flute made of human bone, and there was a certain song that if you played on that flute, you would be put into the same kind of hypnotic state and remember your past lives. And the third book was The Hypnotist. And in that book, they're actually looking for a tool, but they never find it. And in this book, the Book of Lost Fragrances, the tool is the scent. But none of the books have to be read in order, and they all have different main characters. There's a minor character in all the books who is looking for the tools, but that's just kind of to tie all the books together a little bit. So I think that so the fragrance, Cleopatra's fragrance, is what inspired me to write the Book of Lost Fragrances. And let me see, what got me writing about reincarnation is the next question. So when I was a little girl, the story that my mother used to tell is when I was about 3 years old, we were at a family dinner, and my great-grandfather and great-grandmother were there, my grandparents, my mother, and my dad. And apparently, I started telling my great-grandfather about the time that we went to his cousin's house and broke the windows with apples, with frozen apples in the middle of the winter, which sounds like a very creative 3 or 4-year-old to me. But apparently my great-grandfather started getting all excited, and when he was a little boy of about 7 or 8, he and his cousin in Russia had gone to one of their friends' house and thrown frozen apples at the house and broken the windows. And my great-grandfather was in business, but he was also a Kabbalist scholar. So he thought, and the Kabbalists believe in reincarnation. He became convinced that I was the reincarnation of this long-dead cousin of his, which he told everybody at the table, and my mother thought it was the silliest thing that she'd ever heard. But something about the way that he kept talking about it intrigued her, and so my mom started doing research about reincarnation. And a book had recently come out called The Search for Bridie Murphy. And she read that book and really became fascinated with reincarnation and fascinated with the idea that I might actually be reincarnated from this cousin, long dead Russian cousin. So reincarnation in our house was kind of like a subject that people talked about. You know, some kids talk about riding their bicycle all the time. I talked about being reincarnated all the time. And the older I got, the more involved in it I got. To the fact we lived across the street from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and not far from the Museum of Natural History. And I used to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and wander around the Egyptian wing all the time with my mom and tell her that I had lived there in a previous life. So I was a very imaginative child, or I really was reincarnated. But all of that kind of started my interest in the subject. And I didn't write about it for a really long time because I actually thought that people were going to think that I was crazy if I wrote about it a lot. So I was writing a lot of psychological suspense and more thriller kind of novels. And then my mom died, and my niece was born. And then when my niece was about 3 or 4 years old, she started talking about seeing my mom and that she'd known my mom. And it was like all kinds of reincarnation conversation all over again. It got me reinterested in the subject, and I started thinking about writing The Reincarnationist. So I still don't exactly know what I believe when people ask me. I kind of think that I don't not believe in reincarnation, but I'm still not 100% sure what I really think. So the next question is about how all the famous people in history, how did I pick Cleopatra? So I actually didn't pick Cleopatra. Cleopatra picked me. I was just reading about fragrance, thinking that one of the reincarnation memory tools would be a fragrance. And I really didn't have any idea for what the book was going to be about or how I was going to use fragrance. So I just started reading a history of fragrance. And it was in the very beginning of the history of fragrance that one of these obscure books I was reading mentioned Cleopatra and her obsession. And something just sounded kind of titillating to me, and I started doing more research and found out about this amazing Book of Lost Fragrances, and that's really how the book was born. So the next question is there a mystery? Yes. The question is that you love, from Denise, that you can't wait to read the new book, which is lovely, and that you love historical fiction and you want to know if there's mystery or suspense in this book. Yes, there's mystery and suspense in everything that I write. Um, there's only one book that I've written that doesn't really have too much mystery in it, and that's called Lying in Bed, which is my one attempt at an erotic novel. But the mystery in this book has to do with, oh, my computer's falling, sorry. The mystery in this book has to do with the scent for the ancient scent from Cleopatra's time is supposedly hidden somewhere. And Roby L'Etoile, who is the main character's brother, her name is Jacques L'Etoile. Roby calls her to tell her that he's found something that he thinks relates to this ancient scent. And as soon as he finds it and he tells her that he's found something, he actually goes missing. And she has to fly to Paris, which is where he lives, to try to find out where he is and what's going on with him. And he's actually missing for a large part of the book, and so is the fragrance. And so that's one mystery in the book. Another mystery in the book is that there's a Chinese artist, a calligrapher, who is trying to defect from China. And he may or may not be able to do that, and he may or may not being hunted down by spies. So there's that mystery. And then there are mysteries about how all the different past lives in the book interconnect and what they mean to our main character, Jacques. So that's the next question is about your computer. So I can't answer that question. And the next question is, I lived in Paris for years and visited Grasse. Did you spend much time doing your research? I didn't spend enough time there doing my research, but yes, I spent a lot of time in France doing research for this book. I went to Paris 3 times and Grasse twice, and visited perfume factories, flower fields. I met with several perfumers both in New York and in Paris, which is really one of the most exciting things about doing research for this book. Was I started doing my research with Sophia Grossman, who is one of the most famous women perfumers living. She created Paris for Yves Saint Laurent and Tresor, and she created Calvin Klein's Scent Eternity. And she really is an iconic figure in the fragrance world. And I was really lucky that she was the first person I contacted and the first person who was willing to meet with me. And she met with me 3 or 4 times, and she let me smell a perfume that she was working on as she was working on it. It was really exciting. And then I went to Paris and met Olivier Durbano, who was a niche perfumer in Paris. He was an architect, and then he became a jeweler, and then he started creating perfumes based on semi-precious stones. And there are 6 of them, from turquoise to quartz to onyx to citrine. And you can find him online, and pictures of him on my Pinterest boards, which if you go to Pinterest and look for me, I'm MJ Rose. I have a lot of Pinterest boards with a lot of pictures that have to do with things relating to this perfume. I spent a lot of time in Paris in the catacombs where part of the book takes place, and at perfume museums, and at fragrance counters in Paris and New York, buying way too much perfume and smelling lots of great things. I also wound up getting very involved with vintage perfume, because a lot of great perfumes don't exist anymore, and the formulas have changed so much to make them more affordable, and also because a lot of fabulous essences and absolutes have been outlawed by the government, who thinks that they cause allergies and things like that. So I bought a lot of vintage fragrances and a lot of samples of vintage fragrances, which I really have fallen in love with. So the next question is, oh, but I wish the sound went both ways, because Connie, tell me where you lived in Paris. I rented an apartment every time I went on Rue de Université, and I love that neighborhood. I'd really like to live there for a while. Hi, Karen. So your question is, how do you come up with some of your plots? You haven't read any of my books yet. Well, I hope that that's remedied, and I hope that you do read this book. I come up with my plots in a kind of I have no idea how way. I, I, I kind of have a sense of an idea, and then I just start reading the history of the time period or the subject and looking at pictures and going to museums and kind of surrounding myself with the world that I think I want to write about. And I take a lot of walks and I try to swim a lot. And while I'm doing that, little tiny pieces of the book start coming to me and I start putting them together. It takes, I don't know, about 3 to 6 months to come up with an idea that is going to work, and about a year and a half to write it, sometimes longer. Um, oh, so here's a great question from Nancy. So the question is, when you published the first ebook, did you have a glimmer of how huge e-publishing would become? So I think I need to explain what that means first. In 1990, I got my first agent in 1995, and I had written 2 books then. And she started sending them out, and the editors and the people at the publishing companies really liked the books, but they said that they didn't really fit any one genre, and they didn't know how they'd be able to market them. So I was in advertising at the time. I was the creative director of a very big advertising agency in New York City. And I was kind of surprised, kind of horrified actually, at the idea that the publishers didn't know how to market a book that was cross-genre. So I decided that I was going to go online. I had been doing research online for one of my clients, and it was we're now up to like 1998. And I decided that I was going to go online and I was going to self-publish this book. And I didn't even think of it as self-published. I was going to put the book up online as an electronic download. And I was going to market it the way that I thought the publisher should market the book. And then I was going to see if it worked and if it took off. And if it took off, then I would be able to go back to my agent and I would be able to give her my marketing plan, and I would be able to show the publishers how to market my book. Nobody was talking about ebooks. There were no electronic readers. This was in 1998, and this was really just a crazy experiment that everybody told me I was nuts to do. But I did it, and it was really successful, and we sold over 3,000 of these electronic downloads, and people really loved the book, and I was able to go back to my agent and give her my marketing plan, and in there somewhere, the Doubleday Book Club and the Literary Guild discovered the book online and offered to buy it for the clubs, which made history. It was the first time that they'd ever bought a book for the book clubs that had been self-published or that had been discovered online. So my agent then went to the publishers that had rejected the book in the first place with the marketing plan, and we got an offer, and we sold the book in 1999. And it made a lot of noise and got a lot of attention from the New York Times to Time Magazine to Newsweek to NPR, because nobody had ever used the internet before to sell a novel. And it was the first novel or the first ebook that got picked up by the New York publishing houses that was self-published. So it seemed, and then everything was very quiet in e-publishing for a very long time, because there were no easy e-readers, and so ebooks didn't really take off, and it seemed like I'd just done something that was kind of interesting, but not particularly important. And then in 2007, when Amazon started coming out with the first Kindle, or 2008, I'm not sure what year it was, things started heating up, and now it looks like it's, and of course it's huge, and it's going to become probably the largest percentage of books sold in 2013 or 14, but right now it's like 25% of all books sold in certain categories, 50% in other categories, and it's really turned into something that nobody thought was going to happen, but a lot of us believed was going to be this big, because if you look back at the history of books, mass market books were such a huge breakthrough in publishing, because suddenly books were cheaper. And whenever anything gets cheaper and easier to buy, it becomes a huge part of the market. And ebooks are easier than mass markets, and they're cheaper than mass markets. So that is that's kind of where we've come to, and it's really exciting. This summer I self-published um, four of my books. Three of them are in print with my publisher, but they didn't own the e-rights. So I was able to go back and self-publish the e-books of my Butterfield Institute series, which was kind of an interesting phenomena because a lot of people in the ebook space didn't know about what I'd done in 1999, and it was like getting reacquainted with the space. And it was so much easier than it was in 1999. So my next question is, they say that scent is a strong window into memory. Does this play a role in your novel? I'd say that that's pretty much the main theme of the novel, that scent is a strong window into memory. And in my novel, it's not just a window into your present day memories, but it actually winds up being a window into your past life memories too. So that's definitely one of the things that the book is about. I actually just lost you. So let me just go back. Okay. So the next question is, do your friends ever find themselves hidden in my books? Never. I actually write mostly to entertain myself. I worry about everything a lot, and when I'm writing, I'm preoccupied. I don't think about real stuff. So I wind up, wait, there seems to be a sound problem. Are you having trouble hearing me? Let me call and see if I should keep going or stop for a minute. It's MJ. Hi. I need to know if it's somebody said the sound's cutting out. Can you guys hear me or not? Oh, now it says we can hear you. You can hear me? Okay, I'll go back to the question. Thanks. Okay, so the question was, are my friends hidden in my books? No, because I would be really bored writing about people that I know. What's really exciting to me is inventing people and stories that I don't know about, and that's what keeps me really interested in what I'm doing. So the next question is, do you think you can have more than one soulmate? And if you have found your soulmate, how did you find that person? I've actually done a lot of research into this, and Deepak Chopra talks about it a lot. And I think that I have a kind of crazy theory that's not in the book, but what I think is that I think we all have soulmates in different lives, and that I think that our souls, when we die, go back into a big kind of cosmic soup. And so when we're reborn, we have lots of different people in us. We're not just really living one life, but we have, like, we're a mosaic of many, many lives. And so then we would have soulmates from many, many different lives. I haven't written about that yet because, like I said, it's a little too complicated, and it doesn't exactly lend itself to an easy fiction story. Or I don't even write easy fiction stories. It's hard enough writing about reincarnation without writing about this crazy theory. So I do think that we do have multiple soulmates, and I think that in our lives we find them. And I don't think that they're all men or women. I mean, I don't think that they're all sexual. I think that we have friends who are soulmates. I think people have children who are their soulmates and parents who are their soulmates. So I don't think it's just a search for one person. So the next question is, do I personally have a favorite scent? And what's the most surprising ingredient you've discovered that has been used into perfume? So I have many favorite scents. Some of them are, I guess my favorite scent right now is called Amsour, the scent of soulmates. And it's the scent that the perfumer Frederic Bouchardet, who owns Joyous Studios, created for the Book of Lost Fragrances after reading it. And he let me name it, which was really exciting. And so it's named for the scent in the book, which is Amsour, the scent of soulmates, the ancient scent. And Frederick said that he didn't really create this perfume following exactly what notes I thought it had in the book, but he was rather inspired by the notes that are in the book. And Amsur is a really beautiful scent, and 10 of you who are here today are going to get a sample of it. We're going to pick at the end and email you. It's lovely. It has rose in it, which is not surprising, and it has blue lotus and tonka, and it's really just a fabulous scent. I'm really excited that people are going to be able to start smelling it. It's going to be on sale on Henri Bendel coming late this spring. Some of the other scents that I really love, one is called Citrine by Olivier Durbano, who's a French perfumer, and it's a honey kind of amber scent that's quite delicious. And I love Mitsuko, Shalimar, and Vol de Nuit, which are all Guerlain scents, but I actually only like the vintage bottles of those scents. I've been buying them up on eBay when I can find them. They smell better to me than the new formulations because of certain things that perfumers are no longer allowed to use, one being oak moss, which is a major ingredient in perfumes, but is outlawed now to use the original, partly because of the way you had to get it was to rip the bark off the trees, and they're trying to save the trees, and also because supposedly it's a high allergen, although I don't sneeze from any of my old Guerlains. I think some of the most surprising ingredients that I discovered that have been used in perfume are I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but ambergris is something that a sperm whale regurgitates. It's like residual something that comes from his stomach. It has nothing to do with sperm. It's a gray mass that you can find on the beach, and it's an amazing scent. It's on its own, it's beautiful, but it's also how it's used to tie other scents together and give them a kind of velvety smoothness. And it's this ugly, ugly gray lump of, you know, waste from a whale. And that's really interesting. And the other one is musk that's taken from animals and used in perfume, which is no longer done anymore, but that used to be done. Really amazing things that are put into perfume. Next question is, did you find whether amber is used now or in the past as a basis for perfumes? That's a really curious question. Ambergris has nothing to do with amber. And amber perfumes, which is a classification of perfumes, there are ouds and ambers, florals, orientals. Ambers refer to ambergris, which is this, this waste from the whale. Amber, what you think of that's being used in jewelry, the beautiful orange kind of topazy resin is not used in perfumes, but it's totally what my next book is about. So I don't want to talk any more about it, but that's really fascinating that you asked me, because the book that I'm writing now, that'll be out in 2013, is all about that amber resin. So that was an interesting question, Connie. I wonder was I talking about it online and you saw it somewhere? I'd love to hear. So, Mike, have you ever been regressed to a past life, or do you have any ideas on who you might have been in a past life? Yes. I started doing research on reincarnation when I was in my 20s, and I was going to write a screenplay about reincarnation. I was writing screenplays back then. And I did write the screenplay. It didn't get made because it was very similar to another movie that came out at the time I think it was called Getting It Right. But I went to a past life regressionist, and we worked for about 6 months. And I was not easily regressed. As a matter of fact, I only was able to regress once, and I was only able to see a snippet of that life. I mean, it's so little, it's kind of funny. All I could see was I was walking down a pathway, and I could see my shoes, and they were pilgrim shoes. And I could see ahead of me, there was a stone house. And that's all that I was able to see. So I was a woman who lived in early America. But one of the really curious things about being regressed that you don't think about if you haven't been regressed, if you haven't seen part of your past life, is that you see through your own eyes. I mean, you're seeing from inside your head. So you don't see yourself. You can't see you can't see your face. You can just see your hands. You can look down and see your feet. Um, and I hadn't thought about that. That wasn't something that I would have ever imagined. So that was a little bit of a surprise. I went to another regressionist, and he went into um, tra- trances to try to find who I'd been in a past life because I was starting to get really desperate to know who I'd been. And he found me in ancient Egypt and in Greece and in several places and told me some really interesting stories about who I'd been. But since I didn't feel them or find them, I feel kind of odd knowing if they're real or not. I'm a little bit like a character in all the books named Malachi Samuels, who is the reincarnationist who runs the Phoenix Foundation, which is kind of like the hub of all the books. In each book, somehow that he always plays a small role, and Malachi's whole gestalt is that he can't remember any of his past lives, and it's torturing him. And so he wants to find the memory tools so that he can find out who he was in his past lives. And I kind of feel a little bit like him, that I don't know what mine are, and he doesn't know what his are, and I feel his frustration. That also is the only thing he and I have in common. So the next question is, have I done any trilogies? Not meaning to do any trilogies, Karen, but um, the Butterfield Institute series is 3 books. And the Halo Effect, the Delilah Complex, and the Venus Fix. And so they by default are a trilogy because there are only 3 of them. And when you read them, they kind of seem like they end, although I've always thought that I might go back to them one day because I'm really still very much enamored with that character in that world. They're about a New York City sex therapist whose name is Dr. Morgan Snow, and she has a child, a little girl, who's now about 14, who wants to be an actress very badly. And Morgan works with a lot of very disturbed people. And they're very different books. They're hardcore suspense, no historical fiction, very psychological. And they're all out in ebooks now for only like $3.99. So it's a good time to buy them and test them out. So the next question is, I was wondering about how you work. Do you have a schedule when you write or wait for inspiration? Also, does your personal mood affect your ability to write? So I'll start with the end of that question first. Other than like extremely severe moods, no. Writing, once you're published, writing becomes a job. And you got to go to work every day, even if you don't feel like it. So other than being sick or having, really bad cold, I just write every day. And it's not something that I really think about whether or not I'm going to write. It's just, you got to get up and you got to write. So my schedule is that I try to get up early, about 6:30 or 7, and go online right away, check my email really fast, and then settle down to work for at least 2.5 hours before the phone's going to ring, before anybody needs anything in email, before anybody is going to interrupt the day. Really just sit there and communicate with the characters and get my pages done. I try to write 1,500 words a day, and I usually can do that in those 2 hours. Once the first draft of a book is done, I write 2 or 3 times a day. So once the first draft is done, to write the second draft, I write in the morning, and then I write again from 4 to 6. And then if it's going really well and I have a lot of energy, I'll write again at night from 8 to 10, but that's pretty infrequent. It's usually just twice a day for about a total of 4 hours. And in between that, I run a marketing company for authors called Author Buzz, so I do that. And I also try to walk or swim, go out with the dog, do errands, all kinds of normal stuff. The one thing that I do that's pretty unusual is the 3 months before I start working on a book, I create a journal for my main character. And the journal has his or her thoughts, and things like theater stub tickets and cards that she's gotten and pieces of ribbon that she's saved. And it's kind of like a big collage. And I also write down what she thinks about I plot in that book. And at the end, while I'm writing that book, I also have to have her pen. And every character has her own or his own pen. It all sounds so silly, doesn't it? But it's kind of like a ritual that just seems to be really important to get me into the character. And there has to be music for each book that's specific to that book, or scent, like with the candles in this book, that I always had to burn the same candles to get me into the mood of the book. So the next question is, I loved In Session. How did you get, okay, let me tell everybody what it is and then I'll explain it. So I was talking about that Butterfield Institute series before about Morgan Snow. And years ago, Lee Child, who I'm sure you all know, who writes the fabulous Jack Reacher books, Lee Child has a message board. And I know Lee, and I was on his message board one day when another really good thriller writer, Barry Eisler, was on. And Barry and Lee were talking about how if there are two characters, Jack Reacher and John Rain, got into a fight, which one of them would win? And I was joking around and I said, well, whichever one of them would win, I want my character, Morgan Snow, to be able to get both of them into therapy. Because she's a sex therapist, and these two guys, Jack Reacher and John Rain, are crazy. And they'd be fascinating characters to put into psychoanalysis, especially via sex therapy. So it was just a joke. And then last summer, or actually last May, I was thinking about Morgan Snow and thinking about how I'd like to write something about her again, but I wasn't ready to write a whole book. And I thought it would really be fun to do that thing that I thought about so long ago, and to have Morgan Snow get Jack Reacher into therapy, John Rain, and Cotton Malone, who's Steve Barry's main character, who I've come to know and really find fascinating. Cotton Malone is a character who never has sex. He's been in like 11 books, and he's never had sex once, and that's not normal for 11 years. So I thought it'd be really cool to find out about what makes all these guys tick. So I wrote to them all, and I asked them all if I could write these short stories with Morgan Snow somehow managing to get these big macho thriller heroes into sex therapists. And they all said if I could figure out how to get them in, that none of their characters would ever go to sex therapy. But if I could figure out how to do it, they'd go along with it. Of course, if they had to like the story. So I started writing the stories, and wrote each one, took about a month, and then I sent each story to the guys and was really surprised, thrilled, and delighted that they all liked their stories and let me publish them. So the book is called In Session, and it's on sale on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and it's only $1.99, and I think it's a 60-page ebook. And I think it's really fun. I'd love you all to read it and tell me what you think. So the next question is, have I ever written a comic novel? No, and I don't think I ever will, because I don't think I'm in the slightest bit funny. So I like reading them, though. One of the last ones I read that was fabulous was by Jonathan Tropper, and it's really terrific. All of his books are really wonderful. He's very funny, and everybody should read him. The next question is, do you love to write about the past, present, or future? Which one is your favorite? I don't think that I have a favorite. Well, that's not true. I like writing about the past better than I like writing about the present, and I don't have any interest in writing about the future. So I like writing about the past because I think it's very dramatic. There are things that used to happen in life that lead to fabulous drama that just can't happen anymore now that we have cell phones and computers, and we can't be lost, and we can't miss trains without telling the person on the other end that we missed them, and we can't go missing in a jungle, and there's just so many things that have changed because of our communications that really screw up drama. I mean, like, think about Dr. Zhivago, and we'll deal with the movie, but there's that great scene. She's on the street, he's on the bus, she sees him, he doesn't see her, it's like, oh my God, if they just had cell phones. So I love writing about the past. The next question is, did you like to write as a child? Not as much as I liked to read as a child. I was a huge reader. I was the kind of kid that walking home from school, I literally had a book up to my face and walked down the street holding the book, not able to put it down. I would go into the bathroom at night after it was time to go to sleep and turn on the light and sit on the floor and just keep reading and reading and reading. My mom and dad knew that I was reading and kind of let me do it because they were big readers, and it was fine with them. So I didn't. I wrote poetry out of teenage angst like crazy, but I really was going to be an artist. I wanted to be a painter, and I love books, but I never really thought that I could write one. I mean, then there would be like I'd toy with it. I 16. I wrote a short story, but it really wasn't something I ever thought I could do when I was a kid. I was really much more enamored of paintings and museums, and that was really my life's dream, was to become a painter. Um, and that's really it still is the love of my life in terms of the arts. Is I go to museums all the time, and I really can't get enough of painting and sculpture. Um, what authors did you enjoy reading as a child, and what current authors or genres do you enjoy now? So when I was a kid, there were just good books and bad books, but I guess I gravitated towards mystery. I loved Nancy Drew, but I loved Little Women, and I loved The Secret Garden was my favorite book when I was growing up. Um, I guess magical, historical, um, kind of romantic, big stories. And then what current authors or genres do you enjoy now? I love reading historical fiction. I love reading historical suspense. I love reading, I like Kate Morton, who writes big, I love Gothics. The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters. I love Diana Gabaldon's The Outlander. I loved all of Anne Rice. Um, I love Steve Barry's work in Lee Child and Barry Eisler. Pretty eclectic, but I really like strong plots and strong characters. I don't read a lot of what's called, what's termed literary fiction, because I need books that move pretty fast. And I also like things that are a bit escapist. I don't really like reading harsh, cold reality books. Life is enough like that for me to not want to read that when I want to get lost in something. Although I do love Joshua Henkin's work, and Paul Auster and John O'Hara. I really am eclectic. At Goodreads, I have, I think, 500 books that I've tagged. So I read all over the place, but if I had to pick one genre, it would be historical fiction or historical suspense. The next question, what are your goals as a writer, and what do you want people to come away with after they've read one of your books? So my goals as a writer are to stay writing. The business is really tough right now, and you have to really sell well to keep getting published, because there's so many people out there that have stopped reading, and it's gotten a little scary. So the biggest goal that I have is to just keep writing books that are good enough that people keep buying them, and I get to keep writing them. In terms of what I want people to come away with, in the most simple answer to that is that I really, well, you know what? I'll answer another way. I think that the most important thing or magical thing that a writer can do is to entertain someone. I mean, I think that ultimately that's what we are. And people are reading to be entertained. I think that there are certain people who read to learn, and there are certain books that are meant for that. But I don't read fiction for that reason. I read nonfiction for that reason. I read a book, a novel, so that I can escape. So that if I'm in a doctor's waiting office, I don't have to think about what's about to happen next. And so my goal is that I could write books that would give people an escape, but that are smart enough and challenging enough that they're not bored and they haven't heard the story before, and that they keep thinking about it after it's over, and that it stays with them and they want to read more of what I've written. So the next question is, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Um, oh, I'm not in my own house. I'm staying at a friend's house today, and that's her fireplace mantle. I wish I had this fireplace. I wish I had this house. But they're 1950s three-dimensional sculptural graphics that are really interesting. So I don't really know much about them except that they're from the 1950s and they look really fabulous, don't they? I love the color of the house, all the greens and stuff. It's really beautiful here. So Connie said, do I recall hearing you say you find a correlation between gemstones and scents? And if so, how do you feel they combine? Actually, what I was talking about was a perfumer named Olivier Durbano, who I met in Paris and got to know. And I love both his jewelry and his perfumes. And he started out as an architect and then became a jeweler. And then while he was a jeweler and still is a jeweler, he also became a perfumer. And what he does is he creates scents based on gemstones. So he tries to anthropomorphize gemstones into scents and takes the essence of what the gemstone means to him and turns it into a perfume. And they're quite fascinating. There's black onyx and amethyst and turquoise jade, rose quartz, citrine, and I think I'm forgetting one. And the two that are the most perfect for me of what he's done is citrine and rose quartz. For me, I really love gemstones. I mean, what woman doesn't like jewelry, right? But I really do love gemstones. And I've bought two of Olivier's necklaces. I wish I had one to show you. I do, but then I'd have to get up and I'd leave the camera and then you'd be doing nothing for a minute. But anyway, they're really, he uses great big, very earthy stones, and you can wear them all different ways. And they look to me like there are scents trapped in them. They're all, translucent. And they're these amazing colors. And I see the world through colors and scents more than I do through sound. So the gemstones and the scents really appeal to me. The next question is, when did you discover your interest in fragrance? So I can trace that all the way back to being like 10, and my grandmother bringing back a bottle of Elsa Schiaparelli perfume for me from Paris and being utterly enchanted with that perfume. And then I remember wearing Jeanette when I started high school. And I remember stealing my mother's Shalimar and wearing that. And I remember my friend Lori Lane's mother wore Bala Versailles. And when we would go to her house, when I would go to her house and her mother would be out, we'd sit at her dresser and try on all of her mother's jewelry and put her perfume